My parents always loved telling people how they saved me. They treated my adoption like a favor I could never repay, a debt that hung over every birthday dinner and quiet Sunday. But the truth wasn't in their stories. It was hidden in a stack of unpaid bills I wasn't supposed to find. I spent 33 years begging for a seat at their table, never realizing I was the one paying for the food. My apartment in Raleigh was quiet. It was a deliberate kind of quiet, the sort you have to pay for and maintain with fierce protectiveness. I had chosen the third floor specifically because I did not want to hear footsteps above me, and I had chosen the complex because it was 20 minutes away from the house where I grew up. I was 33 years old. I was a healthcare administrator for a mid-sized hospital network. My life was a series of tidy spreadsheets, balanced ledgers, and calm Sunday mornings where no one yelled and no one slammed doors. I had built this piece brick by brick, mostly by learning how to be invisible in a room full of people and how to be entirely self-sufficient the moment I turned 18. But the gravitational pull of the Reed family was strong. It was a pull composed of guilt, obligation, and a childhood spent trying to decipher the erratic weather patterns of my parents' moods. Tonight was my father's birthday. Mark Reed was turning 62. I checked my reflection in the hallway mirror before I left. I looked pulled together. I wore a navy blouse and slacks, sensible and professional. It was the armor I wore when I went to see them. It was a way of saying, "Look, I am stable, I am functional, I am worth the space I take up." The drive to their subdivision took exactly 22 minutes. The houses here were built in the 90s, large brick structures with manicured lawns that hid the mortgages and the secrets inside. My parents' house looked the same as it always did. The hydrangeas were blooming in blue and purple clusters against the porch lattice. My mother, Diane, prided herself on those hydrangeas. I parked my sedan behind my brother's bright red sports car. Ryan was 29, 3 years into a career that none of us quite understood. Something adjacent to marketing or brand consulting that seemed to require a lot of capital without generating much return. When I walked inside, the air conditioning was humming loudly, battling the North Carolina humidity. "Happy birthday, Dad," I said, stepping into the living room. Mark was sitting in his recliner, a glass of scotch resting on the side table. He looked older than 62. His skin had a grayish cast to it, and the lines around his mouth were deep trenches of tension. He looked up at me and offered a tight smile. "Hey, Kennedy, you made it." "I always make it," I said, keeping my voice light. Ryan walked in from the kitchen, holding a beer. He looked flushed, his hair perfectly styled. He had the Reed jawline, the Reed eyes. He looked like them. "Hey, big sister," Ryan said. He gave me a one-armed hug that felt performative. "You look very corporate today. I just came from work." I said. Diane called from the kitchen. "Is that Kennedy? Come help me with the salad. Would you?" I walked into the kitchen. My mother was standing over the island, tossing greens with a wooden spoon. She looked frail. That was the first thing I noticed. She had always been a woman of nervous energy, bird-like and quick. But she looked thinner now. Her hands shook slightly as she gripped the salad tongs. "Hi, Mom," I said. She glanced at me, her eyes sweeping over my outfit. "You look tired." "Kennedy, are you working too much?" "I'm fine," I said. I picked up the stack of dinner plates. "Where do you want these, dining room?" she said. "And make sure Ryan has a coaster for his beer. You know how he is." We sat down to dinner 10 minutes later. The roast was slightly overcooked, dry in the way that stuck to the roof of your mouth. The conversation followed the usual tracks. Ryan dominated the airspace, talking about a potential partnership he was nurturing with a tech startup in Durham. He used buzzwords like synergy and leverage, and my parents nodded along, their eyes shining with a pride that felt disproportionate to the vagueness of his claims. "Kennedy," Mark said, cutting into a potato. "How is the hospital?" "Still pushing paper. I'm managing the surgical coordination department now." "Dad," I said, "it is a lot of logistics. We just overhauled the billing system." Diane sighed. A small, tragic sound. "I don't know how you do it. All those forms. All that red tape. Ryan was always the creative one. You were always so rigid. I paused with my fork halfway to my mouth. I am organized, Mom. Someone has to be. Ryan laughed. It is a good thing. Ken. We need people to keep the trains running on time while people like me design the tracks. The table chuckled. I forced a smile. It was the price of admission. You absorb the small insults to keep the peace. Diane stood up to pour more wine. She had been drinking faster than usual tonight. Her cheeks were flushed, and her movements were jerky. She topped off Mark's glass, then Ryan's, then her own. She barely splashed a drop into mine. To Mark, she said, raising her glass. 62 years. And to Ryan, for barely missing the driveway with that car of his. We clinked glasses. And to Kennedy, Diane added, her eyes glossing over me, for making it here. You know, I was telling my friend Linda the other day that it is funny how different you two are, but then, she is not our real daughter anyway, so we can't expect her to understand this family the way Ryan does. The silence that followed was instant and absolute. It was not a silence of confusion, it was a practiced silence. It was the sound of a vacuum sealing shut. I sat there, my hand frozen on the stem of my wine glass. The words hung in the air above the centerpiece. Not our real daughter anyway. They had never said it like that before. Not in front of me. They had made jokes about my adoption. Sure, they had referenced my biological circumstances with a pitying tone, but to say I was not real, to say I could not understand the family because my DNA was different. I looked at Mark. He was staring at his plate, sawing aggressively at a piece of meat. I looked at Ryan. He was checking a notification on his phone, pretending he hadn't heard. I let out a short, dry laugh. It was a reflex, a desperate attempt to de-escalate the tension in the room. Good one, Mom, I said. Diane took a long sip of her wine. She didn't look at me. I'm just saying, biology is a powerful thing. You can nurture a plant all you want, but a fern is never going to be a rose. I put my fork down. My appetite was gone. Later, after the cake had been served and the presents opened a new watch for Mark that I knew Ryan couldn't afford, and a gift card for me, I went into the kitchen to help clean up. Diane was scraping plates into the garbage disposal. The noise was grinding and harsh. Mom, I said. She didn't turn around. What? That comment at dinner. I said, it hurt. She stiffened. Oh, stop it. I stepped closer. You said I wasn't your real daughter. Diane spun around, her face wet with perspiration. The kitchen was hot, but not that hot. She looked cornered. Don't be dramatic. Kennedy, she snapped. Her voice was brittle. You are always so sensitive. You take everything apart and examine it until it is ugly. It was a joke. It didn't feel like a joke. I said, well, that is your problem. Isn't it? She wiped her hands on a dish rag, throwing it onto the counter with unnecessary force. You should be grateful we took you in. Do you know where you would be if we hadn't? Do you have any idea the sacrifices we made to give you this life? The words struck me in the chest. Grateful. It was the currency I had been paying them in for 33 years. I am grateful. I said quietly. Then act like it. She said, stop picking fights on your father's birthday. I finished the dishes in silence. When I walked out to the living room to say goodbye, Mark was sitting in his chair, rubbing his left arm. His hand was trembling. It was a rhythmic, rolling tremor that stopped when he saw me looking. Leaving so soon, he asked, I have an early meeting. I lied. Happy birthday. Dad? He nodded, not meeting my eyes. Drive safe. As I gathered my purse, I saw Mark and Diane exchange a look. It was a quick, frantic glance. Diane gave a microscopic shake of her head, and Mark pressed his lips together until they were white. It was the look of two people standing on a cracking sheet of ice. On the drive home, the adrenaline faded, leaving a cold ache in my stomach. I replayed the dinner in my mind. The cruelty had been sharper tonight, less veiled, and there was something else, a desperation. My father's tremor, my mother's breathlessness, the way Ryan had watched them with a calculating sort of hunger. I went to work the next day and buried myself in spreadsheets. Data was safe. Numbers did not tell you that you were a fern trying to be a rose. A week later. My phone rang at 2 in the afternoon. It was Ryan. He never called me during the workday. He usually texted, and usually only when he needed a contact at the hospital or advice on how to file his taxes. I picked up. Is everything okay? Hey, Ken, he said. His voice was smooth, but I could hear the tightness at the edges. Yeah, everything is fine. Just calling to check in. I leaned back in my office chair. You are checking in on a Tuesday afternoon. Well, actually, I wanted to talk to you about Mom and Dad. He said, what about them? Have you noticed they seem a little slowed down lately? He asked. I noticed Mom seems stressed, I said, and Dad's hand was shaking. Yeah, exactly, Ryan said. Look, I was over there yesterday, and Mom is having some trouble keeping up with things. Her asthma is flaring up, and I think she has some appointments she is ignoring because the paperwork is a nightmare. I waited. I knew the ask was coming. I would help. Ryan continued, but I am swamped with this startup launch. I mean, I am working 18-hour days, and Dad, well, Dad is not good with the medical stuff. He gets confused. What do you need? Ryan, I asked, could you maybe take over the medical admin for them, just managing the appointments? Dealing with the insurance? You are the expert at that stuff. I frowned. Just the paperwork. Well, and maybe covering a few copays here and there, he said, his voice dropping an octave. Just for a while. Until my deal closes. Dad's retirement savings are a little tied up right now in some long-term bonds, and cash flow is tight. Tied up. It was a convenient phrase. I hesitated. I did not want to get entangled, but they were my parents. If Diane was sick, if she was neglecting her health because of paperwork and copays. I couldn't just watch from the sidelines. I was the responsible one. That was my role. Okay, I said, I can manage the appointments, and I can help with the copays if it is not exorbitant. You are a lifesaver. Ken, Ryan said, seriously, I knew we could count on you. He hung up before I could ask any follow-up questions. 2 days later, I was logged into the patient portal for my mother's primary care physician. I had spent the evening organizing her upcoming visits, pulmonology, cardiology, a routine physical. It felt good to be doing something concrete. It felt like I was earning my place again. Then, at 11 o'clock at night, an email pinged into my personal inbox. Subject payment inquiry. Urgent. I frowned. It was from a clinic billing department I didn't recognize. A boutique diagnostic center in Charlotte. I opened it. Dear M. Reed Holdings Liaison. This is a final courtesy reminder regarding the outstanding balance of $4,500 for services rendered on March 12th. Please remit payment immediately to avoid collections. I stared at the screen. M. Reed Holdings Liaison. My father didn't have a holding company. He had been a mid-level manager at a logistics firm before he retired. And why was this email coming to me? I checked the header. My email address was listed in the CC field, buried under a generic info address. It must have been added to a file years ago when I helped them set up their internet. Or maybe Ryan had put it there. I didn't reply. Instead, I closed my laptop. I needed to see the physical paper trail. The next afternoon, I left work an hour early and drove to my parents' house. I didn't call first. I told myself I was just dropping by to pick up their insurance cards to scan them for my records. When I unlocked the front door, I still had a key. Though I rarely used it, the house was silent. Mark's car was in the driveway, but the television wasn't on. Hello, I called out. No answer. They might have been in the backyard or napping. I walked into the kitchen. On the counter, pushed behind a thick, grease-stained cookbook titled Southern Comforts, was a stack of mail. It wasn't just a few letters. It was a bulging pile, held together by a rubber band. I glanced toward the hallway. Silence. I reached out and pulled the stack from behind the cookbook. The envelopes were white and stark. Final notice, past due, urgent action required, second warning. My heart hammered against my ribs. There were credit card bills, utility warnings, and medical bills. I flipped through them. The dates went back months. The top letter was from the power company. Scheduled disconnection date, October 14th. That was 3 days away. I felt a wave of nausea. They were drowning. They were completely underwater. And they were pretending everything was fine. They were drinking scotch and buying expensive roasts and judging me for not being a rose. All while the lights were about to go out. "What are you doing?" I jumped and spun around. Mark was standing in the doorway of the kitchen. He was wearing his bathrobe, even though it was 3 in the afternoon. His face was blotchy, and his eyes were wild with a mix of fear and fury. I came to get the insurance cards. I stammered. "I saw these. Dad, the power is about to be cut off." He crossed the room in 3 long strides and snatched the letters out of my hand. "You are snooping," he shouted. His voice cracked. "I am not snooping," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. They were on the counter. "Dad, look at these. You have final notices from the bank. What is going on?" "This is none of your business," he yelled. He shoved the letters into the pocket of his robe, crumpling them. "You come into my house, uninvited, and start digging through my private affairs. I am trying to help you," I said. "Ryan told me money was tight, but he didn't say this. He said your savings were tied up. Ryan doesn't know what he's talking about." Mark snapped. "And neither do you. Dad, please, let me sit down with you. We can sort this out. I can help you make a budget. I don't need your help," he roared. He was shaking now, the tremor in his hand violent. "I don't need you looking down your nose at me, acting like you are better than us because you can balance a checkbook. Get out, Dad. Get out. Kennedy. Leave the insurance cards. I will handle my own family." The way he emphasized my own family was a slap. I stared at him for a moment. He looked small. He looked terrified. He was a man holding on to his dignity with a grip so tight it was strangling him. I walked out. I didn't say another word. I drove home in a daze. My hands were gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles were white. The image of those red letters burned in my mind. When I got back to my apartment, the silence that usually comforted me felt oppressive. I paced the living room. I couldn't just let them lose the house. I couldn't let the power go out on my mother's nebulizer. I sat down at my desk and opened my own financial files. I pulled up my savings account, my retirement fund, my checking account. I needed to see what I could liquidate. If I skipped my own vacation fund and pulled a little from my emergency savings, I could maybe cover the utility bills and the most urgent medical debt. I logged into my primary bank's portal. I scrolled through the transaction history, looking for liquid cash. Then I clicked on a tab I hadn't opened in years. It was a secondary savings account. I had opened it when I was 18, right before I left for college. I barely used it. It was just a place where I parked a little extra cash sometimes. I kept a minimal balance there to keep it open. I looked at the ledger. There were deposits. I blinked and leaned closer to the screen. Every month, on the first of the month, for the past 5 years, there was a deposit of $300. The description was cryptic, AR support. I scrolled back. It went back further than 5 years. It went back 10. The amounts varied slightly, but they were consistent. When I was in college, the deposits were larger, $800 a month. When I graduated, they dropped to $300. I had never noticed them. I had never set up alerts for this account. And because the amounts were relatively small, and I rarely checked the balance, they had just accumulated. I did the math in my head. Over the last decade, thousands of dollars had quietly flowed into this account. AR support. I didn't have an uncle with those initials. I didn't have a trust fund that I knew of. My parents certainly weren't sending me money. They barely had enough to keep their own lights on. I clicked on the transaction details for the most recent deposit. Sender PC, Servicing Group, Memo AR Support / Beneficiary. K. Read. My heart started to beat a slow, heavy rhythm. I looked at the time. It was 7 in the evening. The bank was closed. I sat back in my chair. The glow of the monitor illuminating the dark room. My parents were hiding bills behind a cookbook. My father was terrified of me seeing his finances, and someone, somewhere, had been paying me a monthly allowance for my entire adult life without me knowing who they were. I thought about Diane's voice at the dinner table. She is not our real daughter anyway. I looked at the screen again. Beneficiary K. Reed. I wasn't just a fern. I was a fern that someone was paying to water. And I had a terrible feeling that the water was coming from a well my parents had been trying to cap for 30 years. The morning sun was hitting the blinds in my office, creating slatted shadows across my desk. But I wasn't looking at the light. I was looking at the phone in my hand, listening to the fourth variation of generic jazz hold music the bank had cycled through in the last 20 minutes. Finally, a human voice cut in. "Thank you for holding, Ms. Reed. I have the details on that transaction inquiry you referenced." I sat up straighter, uncapping a pen. "I'm listening." "Okay, so regarding the recurring deposit labeled AR support," the representative said, her voice clipped and professional. "That is an automated clearinghouse transfer. It is coming from a third-party servicing entity called PC Servicing Group." PC Servicing Group, I repeated, writing it down. "Who are they? Do you have an address?" "A contact name." "They are a payment processor," she said. "They handle high-volume disbursements, likely for annuities. Structured settlements, or trust distributions. I can see the routing number, but I cannot see the originating individual. You are listed as the beneficiary, Ms. Reed, but you are not the initiator, so I cannot change it," I asked, "or stop it." "You can refuse the funds," she said. "But to get information on the source, you would need to contact the servicing group directly. We just received the money." I thanked her and hung up. I stared at the notepad. Annuities, structured settlements, trust distributions. None of those words fit the life I knew. My parents were people who lived paycheck to paycheck. Or at least, that was the story they told. We were the family who clipped coupons. We were the family who drove cars until the engines seized. The idea of a trust, of a structured settlement, felt like it belonged to a different tax bracket, a different world entirely. I needed a translator. I called Tessa Mallory. Tessa and I had gone to college together at UNC. She was a paralegal at a high-end family law firm in downtown Raleigh, the kind of person who could read a 50-page contract in 10 minutes and tell you exactly where you were being screwed. We met for lunch at a salad place near her office. The noise of the lunch rush was deafening, clattering forks, shouting orders, but Tessa was an island of calm. "Let me see the statement," she said, extending a hand before she had even opened her napkin. I slid the printout across the small metal table. She put on her reading glasses. The ones she claimed made her look severe, and scanned the lines. "Okay," she said after a moment. "Recurring. Same date every month. The amount fluctuates slightly over the years, probably adjusted for inflation or cost of living index. This isn't a gift, Kennedy. This is an obligation." "What do you mean?" I asked, picking at my kale. "I mean someone is legally required to send this to you." She said, "PC, servicing is a middleman. Rich families use them to handle alimony or trust payouts, so they don't have to write a check themselves. It keeps things clean, impersonal." But who, I asked? "My parents are broke. They are hiding bills behind cookbooks." Tessa looked at me over the rim of her glasses. Her expression was careful. "Kennedy, is it possible there is someone else? A biological relative? A settlement from an accident you were in as a kid?" I shook my head. No accident. And as for biological relatives, it was a closed adoption. State ward. My parents always said my birth mother was a teenager who couldn't handle it. There was no money there. Tessa tapped a manicured fingernail on the paper. "Here is what you do," she said. "You don't ask your parents yet. If this is a trust, there is a trustee. You write to PC. Servicing. You send a formal request for a statement of benefits and the plan summary. You are the beneficiary, by law. They have to tell you what the vehicle is. And if my parents find out if the money is in your name," Tessa said firmly, "it is your business, not theirs." I took her advice. I drafted the letter that night. Using a template Tessa emailed me. It was stiff, legal language that felt foreign on my tongue as I read it aloud. But I signed it, sealed it, and sent it via certified mail the next morning. Then I waited. The waiting was the hardest part because I still had to exist in the world where I was just Kennedy, the daughter who didn't quite fit. I still had to answer Ryan's texts about Mom's medical appointments. I still had to drive past their house and feel that familiar knot of anxiety in my stomach. 5 days later, a thick envelope arrived at my apartment. It wasn't from PC Servicing. It was from a firm called Harrow Associates, fiduciary services, based in Charlotte. I sat on my living room floor and opened it with a letter opener. The stack of papers was dense. I skipped the cover letter and went straight to the summary page. Beneficiary Kennedy Reed. Date of inception: November 12, 1993. Classification Support Trust / Household Stabilization Fund. I froze. Household Stabilization, not Education Fund, not Future Savings. I turned the page. There were ledgers going back decades. I saw the monthly deposits into my account, the ones I had found, but there were other columns, larger numbers. Disbursement to Guardian Mark Reed, Purpose Primary Residence Maintenance, Disbursement to Guardian Mark Reed, Purpose Educational Supplement. I ran my finger down the lines. The dates jumped out at me. June 2004. A disbursement of $12,000 for structural repair. I closed my eyes and traveled back in time. I was 12 years old. I was sitting at the kitchen table, doing homework. The old linoleum floor was peeling. Mark had come home one day, beaming, and announced he had gotten a bonus at work. A huge bonus. 2 weeks later, contractors were tearing up the floor. They installed granite countertops. They put in a new stove. I remembered my mother crying, saying it was finally the kitchen she deserved. I remembered thinking, Daddy must be very good at his job. I looked at the ledger again. June 2004. $12,000 from the trust. I kept reading. August 2008. Educational supplement, $6,000. That was the year Ryan started private school. I remembered the argument. I was in public high school, doing fine, making honor roll. Ryan was struggling. He needed smaller class sizes. My mother had insisted. Mark had said it was impossible, that they couldn't afford it. Then, a week later, the scholarship came through. A partial scholarship, they said. God was providing. It wasn't a scholarship, it was me. Or rather, it was money attached to me. I felt a cold flush spread across my skin. The language of the trust was specific household stabilization. The money wasn't for my tuition. It was for the environment I lived in. It was meant to keep the roof over my head and the lights on. But looking at these numbers, it seemed like the definition of stabilization had been stretched until it tore. Granite countertops weren't stabilization. Private school for a sibling wasn't stabilization. My parents had been treating me like a line of credit. The realization made me feel physically ill. It reframed every moment of gratitude they had extorted from me. You should be grateful we took you in. Took me in. It looked like I had paid rent since I was in diapers. My phone rang, jarring me back to the present. I looked at the screen. Dad. I took a deep breath, shoving the papers under a throw pillow as if he could see them through the phone line. Hello, Kennedy, Mark said. His voice was tight, breathless. It is your mother. What happened? I stood up, the instinct to help overriding the anger simmering in my gut. She had a spell, he said. She couldn't catch her breath. We are at the urgent care now. They are saying she needs oxygen at home. They are talking about daily monitoring. Is she okay right now? She is stable, he said. But Kennedy, I can't do this by myself. The doctor is giving me a list of equipment we need. Forms to sign. I don't understand half of it. I closed my eyes. I could hear the panic in his voice. But now, for the first time, I heard something else too. I heard the sound of a man who was used to being rescued. I will be there, I said. When I arrived at the urgent care, Diane was sitting on the exam table, looking gray and small. She had a plastic mask over her face, misting oxygen into her lungs. Mark was pacing the small room, clutching a clipboard. Thank God, he said when I walked in. He shoved the clipboard at me. Talk to them. Fix this. I took the clipboard. I spoke to the nurse. I arranged for the oxygen delivery. I sorted out the insurance copay, using my own card because Mark patted his pockets and claimed he left his wallet in the car, back at their house. After getting Diane settled in the recliner with her new machine, I went into the kitchen to make tea. Mark followed me. "We need to talk about the long term." He said. I turned on the kettle. "What do you mean? The doctor said she needs home care." Mark said, "A nurse to come in 3 times a week, someone to check her vitals, help with the nebulizer. I can't do it. Kennedy, my hands." He held up his trembling hands. "I understand. Dad," I said, "Medicare should cover some of it. Not all of it," he said, "and not the good agency. We want the one Ryan suggested. Elite Care. They are the best. They are also the most expensive." I said. Mark's face hardened. "She is your mother. Kennedy. She wiped your nose. She fed you." I gripped the edge of the counter. "I know that. Then you will handle it," he said. "I am handling the paperwork." "Dad?" "No," Mark said, stepping closer. "You will handle it. All of it. Ryan is busy with the business. He is building a future for this family. You have that stable job at the hospital. You have no kids. You have no expenses." I stared at him. No expenses. I had rent. I had student loans. "If you want to prove you belong here," Mark said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous register, "you will help us. You will do the right thing. If you want to prove you belong here." The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. It was the same old song. The price of admission was going up. "Okay," I said quietly. "I will look into Elite Care." I spent the next 2 days making calls. I set up the account with Elite Care. I gave them my contact information as the primary liaison, mostly because I didn't trust Mark to answer the phone. But when I tried to finalize the start date, the intake coordinator paused. "Ms. Reed," she said, "I see here that we have a prior file for this address. For my parents." I asked, "No. They haven't used home care before. Not under their name specifically," she said, "but the address is linked to an account for, let me see, Reed Family Management." I frowned. Reed Family Management. Yes, there is an outstanding balance on that account from a consultation 6 months ago, and a canceled contract for physical therapy. We can't start new services until that balance of $1,200 is cleared. My stomach dropped. Reed Family Management. It sounded like the sort of entity Ryan would invent to make himself sound like a CEO. "I will take care of it," I said, my voice wooden. I didn't pay it over the phone. I needed to see what this was. I drove to the Elite Care office in North Raleigh. It was a sterile building with fake plants and inspirational posters about wellness. I spoke to the billing manager. She turned the screen toward me. The account for Reed Family Management listed Mark Reed as the contact. The billing address was a PEO box in town. But the most damning thing was the payment history. There were 3 attempted payments, all returned for insufficient funds, and the bank account linked to them. It wasn't my parents' personal checking. It was a business account. I asked for a printout of the invoice. I drove straight to my parents' house. It was raining. A slow, miserable drizzle that made the whole world look gray. Mark was in the living room, watching the news. Diane was asleep in the bedroom. I didn't bother with pleasantries. I held up the invoice. "What is Reed Family Management?" "Dad." Mark looked up, startled. He muted the TV. "What, I went to the agency?" I said, "They won't start Mom's Care because Reed Family Management owes them $1,200. What is this?" He stood up, his face flushing a deep red. "I told you to just pay the bill." "Kennedy, why are you always digging? Because you are lying to me," I said, my voice rising. "You created a shell company. Why to hide debt?" "It is just a formality," he shouted, "a way to organize assets." "Ryan said it was smart tax planning, Ryan." I laughed, a harsh sound. "Ryan told you to open a business account with no money in it and bounce checks for Mom's physical therapy." "You don't understand how these things work," Mark yelled. He was shaking again, that violent tremor returning. "You sit there with your steady paycheck and your judgment, and you have no idea what it takes to keep this family afloat. I know exactly what it takes, I said, thinking of the packet from Harrow Associates hidden in my apartment. I know a lot more than you think. Mark's eyes narrowed. What is that supposed to mean? It means I am done playing the fool. Dad, I am done being the bank you withdraw from whenever you feel like it. He stepped toward me, looming over me. He was a tall man, and when he was angry, he knew how to use his size. You listen to me, he hissed. You ungrateful little. You don't get to lecture me. You are not even. He stopped. The silence was sudden and deafening. He had almost said it. He had almost said the thing Diane had joked about. You are not even our real daughter. He clamped his mouth shut, his chest heaving. He knew he had gone too far, even for him. I stared at him, feeling a strange sense of calm settle over me. It was the calm of absolute clarity. Finish the sentence. Dad, I whispered. He turned away. Just fix the bill, Kennedy, or don't come back. I left the invoice on the coffee table and walked out. I didn't go home. I sat in my car in the driveway, the rain drumming against the roof. I was shaking. A tap on the window made me jump. It was Ryan. He was holding an umbrella, looking concerned. He motioned for me to roll down the window. I cracked it an inch. Rough in there, he asked. I could hear the yelling from the garage. I didn't look at him. He bounced checks. Ryan, Reed Family Management. Really? Ryan sighed. Look, Ken, Dad is stressed. He isn't thinking clearly. And you are? I asked. Did you set that up? I was just trying to help them manage their assets, Ryan said smoothly. It got a little messy. Cash flow issues. You know how it is. No, I don't know how it is, I said, because I pay my bills. Ryan leaned in closer, the umbrella shielding him from the rain. His face was close to the glass. His eyes were blue, like mine, but they lacked any warmth. Listen, he said, his voice dropping to a murmur. I know you are frustrated. I know you feel like you are doing all the heavy lifting, but you have to understand the dynamic here. What dynamic Mom has always felt guilty, Ryan said, about taking you in, about the fact that they couldn't give you everything. It eats at Dad, too. That is why he is so defensive. He feels like he failed you. That sounds like a lie, I said. Ryan shrugged. Believe what you want, but take my advice. Big sister, don't go digging. Don't go trying to audit the past. It will only end badly for you. Is that a threat, I asked? It is family advice, he said. Just pay the bill. Ken, be the hero. It is what you are good at. He straightened up and walked back toward the house, whistling low under his breath. I rolled the window up. I sat there for another 10 minutes, watching the rain blur the taillights of my car in the rearview mirror. Don't go digging. It was the wrong thing to say to me. I put the car in reverse and backed out of the driveway. I wasn't going to just pay the bill. I was going to find out exactly who had been paying for that driveway, that house, and the lies that filled it. I drove straight to the bank. It was late, but the ATM vestibule was open. I deposited $3,000 into my checking account money I had pulled from my emergency savings. I would pay the agency directly. I would keep Diane alive, but I was done trusting them. When I got home, I pulled the Harrow Associates packet out from under the pillow. I laid the documents on my dining table. Household stabilization. I looked at the date again. November 12th, 1993. The year I was adopted. I opened my laptop and searched for Harrow Associates. They were a legitimate firm, high net worth estate planning. I typed a new search query. How to request full accounting from a trustee as a beneficiary. The results were clear. If I was the beneficiary, I had rights. I could demand to see where every penny had gone. I picked up my phone and texted Tessa. I need a lawyer. A real one. Not just advice. Tessa replied instantly. I will set up a meeting with Celeste Harper. She is a shark. Bring the receipts. I looked at the stack of papers, the granite countertops, the private school, the business accounts. I had the receipts. And I was about to make sure everyone else saw them too. That night, I dreamt of the kitchen remodel. In the dream, I was 12 years old. watching the contractors smash the old linoleum, but instead of wood and concrete underneath, the floor was made of cash, stacks and stacks of bills, rotting in the dark. My father was standing over the hole, shoveling dirt on top of the money, screaming at me to look away. I woke up sweating. I went to the kitchen and poured a glass of water. My hands were steady. My father's weren't, but mine were. I was going to need steady hands for what came next. Celeste Harper's office smelled like old money and aggressive litigation. It was located on the top floor of a glass tower in downtown Raleigh, the kind of place where the receptionist spoke in hushed tones and the coffee was served in actual china. I sat across from her at a mahogany table that was probably worth more than my car. Celeste was a woman in her 50s with silver hair cut in a sharp bob and glasses that magnified her intense, calculating eyes. Tessa had been right to send me here. Celeste didn't look like someone who offered comfort. She looked like someone who won. She had the packet from Harrow Associates spread out in front of her. She had been reading it in silence for 10 minutes. The only sound in the room was the rhythmic tapping of her pen against the leather blotter. Finally, she looked up. "This is interesting," she said. Her voice was low and dry. "What is it?" I asked. "Is it a trust?" "It is a structure that resembles a support trust. But it is drafted more like a private annuity arrangement," she said. She turned the document around so I could see where she had highlighted sections in yellow. "Look at the language here. Household stabilization. And here, beneficiary maintenance." I read the words upside down. "This isn't a standard inheritance trust. Kennedy," Celeste continued. "Usually, a trust is set up to give a beneficiary money at certain milestones, age 25, age 30, marriage. This was set up to pump liquidity into a specific environment. Into my parents' house," I said. "Into the house where you resided." "Yes," she corrected. "The distinction matters. The money follows you. If you had moved out at 16, the money should have theoretically followed you to your new guardian. But look at the disbursement schedule. It is heavy, consistent, and it is routed through a fiduciary to a guardian representative. That is your father." She took off her glasses and rubbed the bridge of her nose. "Someone wanted to ensure you were raised in a specific lifestyle," she said. "They didn't just leave you money. They paid for your childhood. They paid for the roof, the food, the electricity, and based on these figures, they paid a premium." I felt a familiar coldness settle in my stomach. "So my parents were paid to raise me. It looks that way," Celeste said. "Or rather, they were subsidized to ensure you didn't grow up poor. The grantor, the person who put up the money, wanted to guarantee a standard of living." "Who is the grantor?" I asked. Celeste flipped to the back of the packet. "That is the million-dollar question. The name is masked. The documents list the grantor only as the 1993 charitable interest or Client A via Harrow Fiduciary. It is a blind trust structure. Can we find out?" "We can," she said. "But we have to be careful." "Why?" "Because right now, you have a suspicion. If you go in guns blazing and accuse your parents of fraud without knowing who the grantor is or what the exact terms were, they can clam up. They can destroy records. They can claim the money was a gift to them, not you. So what do I do?" "We file a formal beneficiary inquiry," Celeste said. She pulled a fresh legal pad toward her. "As the named beneficiary, you have a statutory right to know the identity of the trustee and the nature of the assets held in your name. We send a demand letter to Harrow Associates. We ask for the full instrument, including the grantor's identity, and my parents." "You say nothing." Celeste advised, "You continue to be the dutiful daughter. You let them think you are just helping with the bills. If they get wind that you have retained counsel, they will circle the wagons. And if they have been misappropriating these funds, using them for things that don't fall under household stabilization, they will try to hide the paper trail." I thought about the kitchen remodel, the private school tuition for Ryan, the Reed Family Management Shell Company. I think the paper trail is already a mess. I said, "Then we let them hang themselves with it." Celeste said. She capped her pen. "I will draft the inquiry today. It will take a few weeks to get a response. In the meantime, Kennedy, You need to be an archaeologist. An archaeologist dig, she said, quietly. Look for old records, adoption papers, bank statements from the 90s, anything that connects your parents to a source of income that doesn't make sense. If we are going to prove mismanagement, we need a timeline. I left her office feeling heavier than when I walked in. I had walked in hoping for a mistake, a clerical error that explained the money. I walked out with a confirmation that my life had been a transaction. I drove home, my mind racing. Archaeologist. I went straight to my bedroom and pulled my small fireproof safe out of the back of my closet. I usually kept my passport, my social security card, and a little emergency cash in there. But there was also a manila envelope at the very bottom. I hadn't opened it since I was 18. It contained the few papers my parents had given me when I became a legal adult. They had handed it to me with a sort of somber ceremony, telling me it was everything they had on my situation. I sat on the floor and undid the clasp. There wasn't much. A copy of my amended birth certificate, listing Mark and Diane Reed as my parents, a certificate of baptism, and a faded, carbon copy document from the Department of Social Services. I picked up the DSS document. The paper was yellowed, the type faint, placement agreement, date November 1993. I scanned the boilerplate text. It was standard bureaucratic language about the transfer of custody, but then my eyes caught a checkbox near the top of the second page. There were 3 options listed under Placement Category 1, Foster Care General 2, Pre-Adoptive State Ward 3, Kinship Placement/Private Arrangement. The third box was checked. I stared at the little X mark, made in blue ink that had turned purple with age. Kinship placement. My parents had always told me a very specific story. They said I was a ward of the state. They said my birth mother was a teenager who had abandoned me at a hospital, and that I had been in the system for a few weeks before they found me through a church agency. They loved the phrase, saved you from the system. It was the cornerstone of their martyrdom. But kinship placement didn't mean a random adoption. In social services terms, kinship meant there was a pre-existing relationship. It meant the child was placed with a relative, a close friend, or someone connected to the biological family to avoid the foster system entirely. I read the line below it. Caseworker S. Miller. Case number 93, CK 402. I grabbed my laptop. I searched for kinship placement definition, North Carolina, 1993. The results confirmed it. Kinship care was prioritized for family members or fictive kin people who knew the child or the family. My parents weren't strangers who saved me. They knew who I was, or they knew who my birth parents were. I felt a surge of betrayal so sharp it made my hands shake. If they knew, then the story about the anonymous teenage mother might be a lie too. And if that was a lie, then the money came from someone who knew me. I looked at the case number again. I found the number for the County Department of Social Services. It was late afternoon, almost 5 o'clock. I dialed, hoping someone would pick up. Department of Social Services, Records Division. A tired voice answered. Hi, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I am calling to inquire about an old case file. My own? From 1993. Name Kennedy Reed. I heard typing. Ms. Reed. Records from 93 are archived off-site. They are sealed. I know. I said, I have the case number. I'm looking for a summary. I was told I could request a non-identifying summary of the background. There was a pause. Do you have the case number? 93. CK 402. Hold on. I waited for what felt like an hour. In reality, it was 4 minutes. Okay. The clerk came back. I can see the index card here. The physical file is in storage, but I can tell you the status. It is listed as a closed private placement. Private placement, I asked. Not state foster care. No, the clerk said. The state facilitated the paperwork, but custody was transferred directly from the biological guardian to the adoptive family. There was no foster care interim. I closed my eyes. They had lied about everything. Can I get a copy of the file? I asked. You can request a redacted summary, she said. It will take about 10 days. You have to fill out a form on our website and upload your ID. We can't give you names of biological parents without a court order if it was a closed adoption. But we can give you the social worker's notes on the placement circumstances. I will do it right now. I said, "Thank you." I hung up and filled out the form immediately. My heart was pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Direct transfer, no foster care, no saving me from the system. It was a handoff, a transaction. And the money started flowing the same month I arrived. 2 days later. The obligation of being a Reed pulled me back in. It was Sunday. Sunday meant lunch at my parents' house. I had tried to get out of it, claiming work. But Diane had called me herself. Her voice was raspy, weak. "Please come. Kennedy," she had said. "I made the potato salad you like. I just want the whole family together." I went, not for the potato salad, but because Celeste had told me to be an archaeologist, and archaeologists have to go to the dig site. The house smelled of roast chicken and bleach. The bleach was new, probably an attempt to sterilize the environment for Diane's lungs. Diane was sitting at the dining table when I arrived. She looked worse than she had a week ago. Her skin was translucent, stretching tight over her cheekbones. She had the oxygen cannula in her nose, the plastic tubing draping over her ears like a bizarre piece of jewelry. Mark was in the kitchen carving the chicken. Ryan was already eating a roll, scrolling on his phone. "Hey, Ken," Ryan said without looking up. "You're late." "I'm on time," I said. Traffic was bad. I sat down across from Diane. "How are you feeling?" "Mom." "Oh, you know," she wheezed, taking it one day at a time. "The new nurse is nice? Expensive, though." She shot a look at me, a guilt-inducing dart. "I'm glad she is nice," I said neutrally. Mark brought the chicken out. He looked harried. His shirt was stained with grease, and his hair was uncombed. He sat down heavily. "Let's eat," he said. The meal was a quiet affair until Ryan decided to speak. "I think the startup is going to get a valuation next month," he announced, buttering another roll. "We are looking at 7 figures. "That is wonderful," Diane said, her face lighting up. She clapped her hands together feebly. "I knew it. I always knew you were going to do big things." Mark nodded, beaming. "That is my boy. A legacy in the making." I chewed my chicken. It was dry. "What does the startup actually do?" "Ryan," I asked, "you keep talking about valuation, but I still don't understand the product." Ryan rolled his eyes. "It is an aggregator. Kennedy, we leverage data streams for mid-market retail. It is tech. You wouldn't get it." "Right?" I said. "I wouldn't get it." Diane took a sip of water, her hand trembling. "Don't be jealous, Kennedy," she said softly. I looked at her. "I am not jealous. Mom, I am asking a question. You have always been critical of him," Diane said. Her voice was gaining a strange, sharp strength, "because he takes risks, because he dreams. You are safe. You are steady. And someone has to be." I said, "Someone has to pay the bills." The table went quiet. Mark dropped his fork. It clattered loudly against the china. Diane stared at me. Her eyes were watery, but there was a hardness behind them. "Ryan is our real legacy," she said. The words came out slow and deliberate. "He carries the name. He carries the spirit of this family. You." She paused to take a breath, the oxygen machine hissing in the silence. "You were a charity project. Kennedy." I stopped chewing. The air in the room seemed to vanish. "Diane," Mark warned, his voice low. "No. Let's be honest," Diane said, looking straight at me. "We took you in because it was the Christian thing to do, because you had nowhere else to go. We gave you a life, but don't sit there and judge your brother. He is flesh and blood. You are the good deed we did." I looked at her. I looked at the woman who had raised me, the woman whose medical bills I was currently paying. I didn't scream. I didn't flip the table. I felt a cold, metallic shield slide into place over my heart. "I am glad I could be your ticket to heaven." "Mom," I said. I stood up. "I will clear the table." I walked into the kitchen with my plate. My hands were shaking, but only a little. I scraped the food into the trash. "Charity project. A moment later, I heard the oxygen machine hissing louder. Diane had followed me into the kitchen. She was leaning against the doorframe, clutching her chest. "Kennedy," she whispered. I didn't turn around. "Go sit down. Mom, you can't breathe." She took a step toward me. She reached out and grabbed my arm. Her grip was surprisingly strong, her fingers digging into my skin. She pulled me down so her face was close to mine. "I didn't mean it like that." She hissed. "You said it." I said, "I am sick," she said. "The medication. It makes me say things." I looked at her. I didn't believe her. She looked around the kitchen, checking if Mark or Ryan were listening. Then she leaned closer, her voice dropping to a terrified whisper. "Kennedy, please," she said. Her eyes were wide, frantic. "Don't take what you find and use it against us." I froze. "What I find?" She was pleading now. There was real fear in her face, not anger, but terror. "I know you are digging," she whispered. "I see the way you look at the mail. I see the way you look at your father. Just, please, we did the best we could. Don't destroy us. People will think terrible things about me." I stared at her. "People will think terrible things about me. Not, 'I am sorry.' Not, 'We love you.'" She was afraid of the neighbors. She was afraid of the scandal. What will they think? "Mom," I asked softly, "that you spent the money meant for me on a kitchen remodel." She flinched as if I had slapped her. "Who told you?" She breathed. She hadn't denied it. She had asked who told me. Mark's heavy footsteps approached the kitchen. Diane let go of my arm instantly and leaned back against the counter. Panting. "Is everything okay in here?" Mark asked, appearing in the doorway. "Mom just needed some water," I said. I helped her back to the table. I finished the lunch. I played the part, but my mind was racing. Don't take what you find. After lunch, Ryan turned the football game on. Mark sat with him, the two of them bonding over a bad call by the referee. Diane went to nap. I wandered down the hallway. I needed to use the bathroom. I told them, but I didn't go to the bathroom. I went into Mark's home office. It was a small room, cluttered with boxes and old tax files. It smelled of dust and stale cigarette smoke Mark used to smoke in here years ago. I scanned the room. Archaeologist. I opened the closet door. It was filled with winter coats and old board games. I pushed aside a heavy wool coat. In the back corner, on the floor, sat a gray metal lockbox. It looked old. The paint was chipped. There was a sticker on the side with the logo of a bank that hadn't existed since the 90s First Union. I knelt down. It was locked, obviously. A small keyhole. I didn't have a key, and if I tried to pry it open, they would know. But there were papers stacked on top of it, a loose pile of receipts and a ledger book that looked like it had been pulled out recently and not put back inside. I picked up the ledger. It was a black composition notebook. I opened it to a random page. October 1998. Receipt $4,500. Expense Camry repair. Note bill to K-Fund. December 1998. Receipt $2,000. Expense Christmas gifts. Note bill to K-Fund. K-Fund. I felt a wave of nausea. They had a name for it. The Kennedy Fund. And they were using it for Christmas presents. For car repairs. I turned the page. Stuck to the inside cover was a yellow sticky note. The handwriting was Mark's. It was jagged and pressed hard into the paper. "Do not discuss with K." Underneath that, in smaller letters, "She must never know the source. Per agreement." I pulled my phone out of my pocket. I turned the flash off. I took a picture of the ledger page. I took a picture of the sticky note. I took a picture of the metal box with the First Union logo. I carefully placed the ledger back exactly how I had found it. I pulled the wool coat back into place. I stood up and backed out of the closet. My heart was thundering in my ears. They weren't just spending the money. They were actively managing the secret. She must never know the source. Why was the source so dangerous? I flushed the toilet in the bathroom to make noise, then washed my hands. I looked at myself in the mirror. I looked the same, but I felt like a stranger. I was a charity project, funded by a mystery benefactor. raised by people who viewed me as a line item in a ledger. I walked back out to the living room. "I have to go," I said. "Leaving so soon?" Ryan asked. Eyes on the TV. "I have work to do," I said. I drove home in silence. I didn't turn on the radio. I needed to think. When I got back to my apartment, the sun was setting. The red light on my landline, which I kept only for buzzing people into the building, was blinking. I pressed play. "This is a message for Kennedy Reed." A formal voice said, "This is Arthur Pendergrass from Harrow Associates. We received your beneficiary inquiry regarding the trust instrument. We are acknowledging receipt." I held my breath. "However," the voice continued, "per the terms of the instrument, full disclosure of the grantor identity is restricted. We cannot release the unredacted file without authorization from the primary trustee, Mr. Mark Reed, or," the voice paused, "or unless you can provide initial evidence of material mismanagement that would justify a judicial review of the fiduciary relationship. Please contact our office if you wish to proceed. Thank you." The message clicked off. I stood in the dark living room. Authorization from Mark Reed. That would never happen. Or proof of material mismanagement. I thought about the photos on my phone, the ledger. Bill to K-Fund, Christmas gifts, Camry repair. I thought about the kitchen remodel. I thought about the overdue bills for Diane's care while they sat on a household stabilization fund that had likely paid out hundreds of thousands of dollars over 30 years. I had the proof. I wasn't just a charity project anymore. I was the auditor, and I was about to close their account. I sat down on my sofa and pulled up Celeste's email on my phone. I attached the photos. "Subject evidence, Celeste," I typed. I found the K-Fund, and I found where the money went. "Let's file." I hit send. Outside, the streetlights flickered on. In Raleigh, families were sitting down to dinner. In my parents' house, Mark was probably drinking scotch, and Ryan was probably dreaming of spending money he didn't earn. Diane was probably struggling to breathe, terrified of what the neighbors would think. They should have been terrified of me. I put my phone down and stared at the wall. The grief was still there, a dull ache under my ribs. I wanted a mom who loved me, not a mom who was paid to keep me. I wanted a dad who protected me, not a dad who used me to fix his car, but I couldn't have that. That family didn't exist, so I would take the truth instead. The call came on a Tuesday morning, shattering the quiet productivity of my office. It was not a number I recognized immediately, but the area code was local. "Ms. Reed," a woman's voice asked. "This is Sarah from Elite Care." I stiffened, my hand hovering over my keyboard. "Is something wrong? Is it my mother?" "It is about the service contract," Sarah said. Her tone was apologetic but firm, the voice of someone who had made this call 100 times before. "We had to suspend services this morning. The nurse arrived at your parents' residence, but per our policy regarding the outstanding balance on the Reed family management account, she was unable to clock in. We had to pull her." I closed my eyes. They had sent the nurse away. My mother, who needed help getting to the bathroom, who needed her oxygen levels monitored, was sitting there alone because a check had bounced. "I thought I paid the balance," I said, keeping my voice low so my assistant outside wouldn't hear. "I deposited money specifically for this. We received a partial payment from a personal account," Sarah said, "but the primary balance linked to the business entity is still flagged, and there was a new charge for equipment rental that was declined this morning. We cannot provide care on credit." "Ms. Reed, I understand." I said, "I will fix it." I hung up. Before I could even put the phone down, it rang again. This time, the caller ID said, "Dad." I let it ring 3 times. I needed to compose myself. I needed to put on the armor I had been forging for 33 years. I answered. "They left." Kennedy Mark's voice was high, bordering on hysterical. "The girl just walked out. She left your mother sitting in the chair." "I know. Dad," I said, "I just got off the phone with the agency. They stopped service because you didn't pay the bill." "I told you to pay it," Mark shouted. "I told you to handle it. I paid $3,000 toward the balance." "Dad, I paid it directly. But apparently, there are more charges. And since you insisted on running everything through a shell company with no money in it, They flagged the account. You have to fix this, he said. He was breathing hard, the panic radiating through the phone line. Diane is upset. She is crying. Her breathing is getting shallow. If you care about her at all, Kennedy, if you have a single shred of decency, you will call them back and give them a credit card, a real one. If I care about her, it was always the leverage point. It was the hook they used to drag me back in. I am coming over. I said, not to visit, to settle this. Mark sounded relieved, misinterpreting my tone. Good. Hurry. I left work. I didn't tell my boss why. I just said family emergency, a phrase that was becoming the defining caption of my life. When I arrived at the house, the atmosphere was thick with tension. Diane was in the living room, the oxygen machine humming its rhythmic beat. She looked pale, her eyes red-rimmed. Ryan was there, too, pacing the kitchen with a phone pressed to his ear, whispering urgently. Mark met me at the door. He looked disheveled, his face patchy with stress. Did you call them? He asked immediately. Is she coming back? I didn't answer him. I walked past him into the kitchen. I placed my purse on the counter and turned to face them. Ryan hung up his phone and leaned against the refrigerator, crossing his arms. He looked annoyed, like I was an employee who had botched a delivery. Here's how this is going to work, I said. My voice was calm. It scared me a little. How calm I was. I will pay the agency, I said. I will cover the full balance, and I will set up a direct auto-pay from my personal account for the next 3 months of care. Mark let out a breath, his shoulders sagging. Thank God. I knew you would do the right thing. But, I continued, raising a hand, I have conditions. Mark froze. Conditions. I want transparency. I said, if I am paying the bills, I want to see the bills. All of them. I want copies of every debt notice. I want to see the bank statements for Reed Family Management. I want to know exactly what is coming in and what is going out. No more hiding mail behind cookbooks. No more locked boxes in the closet. Mark's face darkened. He looked at Ryan, then back at me. You want to audit us? He spat. In our own home, I want to know why a family that has supposedly been receiving support payments for 30 years is broke. I said. Diane made a small, whimpering sound from the living room. Ryan pushed off the refrigerator. He walked over to the island, shaking his head with a condescending smile. Kennedy, he said, you are making this so transactional. It is a transaction. Ryan, I said, I am paying. You are consuming. He sighed. Look, I get it. You want control. But Dad is right. You don't understand the complexity of the finances. Opening the books right now, it would just confuse you. It is messy. I am an administrator. I said, I deal with mess for a living. Ryan drummed his fingers on the granite countertop, the granite I now knew I had paid for. There is a better way, he said, a way that keeps everyone's dignity intact. He reached into his back pocket and pulled out a folded document. He slid it across the counter. I looked down. It was a loan application, a home equity line of credit. We can tap into the equity of the house, Ryan said. There is plenty of value here. We just need a co-signer because Dad's credit score is temporarily depressed. And since I am an entrepreneur, my income is variable, so the banks are sticky about it. I stared at the paper. You want me to co-sign a loan? Just to bridge the gap? Ryan said, it unlocks $50,000. We pay off the medical bills, we clear the debt, and we have a cushion. Family helps family. Right? This way, you don't have to pay out of pocket every month. You just lend your name. I looked at Mark. He was nodding, his eyes eager. It makes sense. Kennedy, Mark said, it is just a signature. The house is the collateral. You won't have to pay a dime. I looked at the document. Then I looked at the kitchen. The house was the collateral, the house that was bought and maintained with money from the trust, and now they wanted to leverage it again, using my credit score to drain the last bit of value out of the walls. No, I said. Ryan blinked. Would I push the paper back? No, I will not co-sign a loan. I will not attach my name to your debt. Kennedy, be reasonable. Ryan said, his voice sharpening. It is the smartest play. It is a trap. I said, if you default, and you will default, the bank comes after me. Mark stepped forward. His hands were shaking violently now. You refuse? He asked. After everything we did for you, I offered to pay for the nurse. Dad, I said, I offered to pay directly, but I will not give you a blank check. Mark slammed his hand on the counter. The noise echoed through the house. You ungrateful, selfish girl, he shouted. Mark, please, Diane called out from the living room, her voice thin and terrified. He ignored her. He was looking at me with pure, unadulterated loathing. We took you in, he yelled. We fed you. We clothed you. And this is how you repay us, by holding your money over our heads. By acting like you are the judge and jury. I am not the one who bounced the check. I said, you think you are so special. Mark sneered. You think because you have a little job and a little apartment that you are better than us, but you are nothing without us. He leaned in. His face inches from mine. I could smell the stale coffee and the fear on his breath. You are not our real daughter, he said. He said it loudly. He didn't whisper it. He shouted it, projecting it to the back of the room, to Ryan, to Diane, to the universe. You are not our real daughter, he repeated. You are a placement, a job. And frankly, you were never worth the trouble. The words hung in the air, vibrating. I stood there. I expected to crumble. I expected the old Kennedy, the one who just wanted to be loved, to start crying. But she didn't. Instead, I felt a strange, cold click in the center of my chest. It was the sound of a door locking. I looked at Mark. I looked at the man I had called Dad for 3 decades. I know. I said, I picked up my purse. I am not signing the loan. I said, and since you don't want my direct help, you can figure out how to pay the agency yourselves. I turned and walked out. Kennedy Ryan called after me. Kennedy, don't walk away. You are killing her. I kept walking. I got into my car. I locked the doors. I drove 2 blocks and pulled over into a church parking lot. I put the car in park and sat there, staring at the dashboard. I didn't cry. I just breathed. In, out. My phone buzzed. A text from Ryan. You need to grow up. Come back and sign the paper. Mom is hysterical. I deleted the text. I drove straight to Celeste Harper's office. I didn't have an appointment, but I needed to be in a place where the law mattered more than blood. Celeste was in a meeting, but her receptionist saw my face and put me in a conference room with a bottle of water. 10 minutes later, Celeste walked in. She looked concerned. Kennedy. What happened? I told her about the nurse, the bounce checks, the demand for a loan, and the explosion in the kitchen. Celeste listened, her expression tightening. They are desperate, she said, and desperate people are dangerous. She sat down and opened her laptop. We need to check something. She said, you said they wanted you to co-sign a home equity loan. Yes. Ryan had the paperwork ready. Celeste typed rapidly. I want to pull your credit report. Right now. If they had the paperwork ready, they might have already run the numbers. I gave her my social security number. She waited. Watching the screen, the progress bar spun. Then she stopped. She turned the laptop toward me. Here, she said, pointing to a line in red. Inquiry Regional Trust Bank, date August 14th. Inquiry Quick Cash Lending Solutions, date September 2nd. I stared at the dates. That was months ago. I didn't authorize these, I said. Celeste scrolled down. New account opened Barclaycard. Credit limit, $10,000. Balance, $9,800. I felt the blood drain from my face. There is a credit card, I whispered. In my name, opened 3 months ago. Celeste said, the billing address is a P.O. box in Raleigh, the same P.O. box as Reed Family Management. They didn't just want me to co-sign. They had already stolen my identity. I felt a wave of nausea so strong I had to put my head between my knees. Breathe, Celeste commanded. Kennedy, breathe. They stole from me. I gasped. My parents stole from me. Celeste's voice was hard steel. This changes the strategy. This isn't just civil mismanagement of a trust anymore. This is criminal fraud. Identity theft. I sat up. The room was spinning slightly. What do I do? We file a police report. Celeste said, we freeze your credit. We dispute the charges. And we sue. I shook my head. A police report. Arrest my father. My brother Celeste looked at me with pity, but it was the tough kind. Kennedy, look at the balance. They maxed it out in 3 months. If you don't report it as fraud, you are liable for that debt. You will pay $10,000 for the privilege of being abused. Is that what you want? I said, then we act. She said, I left her office an hour later. We had frozen my credit files at all 3 bureaus. We had drafted an affidavit of identity theft, but I needed to look one of them in the eye. I didn't go back to the house. I went to the coffee shop where Ryan held his meetings. He had tagged himself there on social media an hour ago. He was sitting at a corner table, his laptop open, laughing with a young woman who looked like she was interviewing for a job. I walked up to the table. Ryan. He looked up. His smile faltered, then recovered into a smirk. Kennedy. Decided to stop throwing a tantrum. I looked at the young woman. Leave, I said. She blinked. Excuse me, I said, leave. Unless you want to be an accessory to a felony conversation. She looked at Ryan. He nodded dismissively. Give us a minute. Sweetheart? She gathered her things and scurried away. Ryan leaned back, crossing his arms. Dramatic much. I pulled the credit report printout from my bag and slammed it onto the table. It hit the wood with a satisfying slap. Explain this, I said. Ryan glanced at the paper. He didn't look surprised. He didn't look guilty. He looked annoyed that he had been caught. Oh, that, he said. Yes, that, I said. A $10,000 credit card in my name, maxed out. Ryan sighed. He picked up his latte and took a sip. It was a mistake, he said. A mistake, I repeated. You accidentally used my social security number. You accidentally forged my signature. It was a cash flow bridge. Ken, Dad and I needed to buy inventory for the startup. We were going to pay it off next month when the valuation came in. It wasn't stealing. I stared at him. I tried to find a shred of remorse in his eyes. There was none. Just a terrifying, vacuous entitlement. You committed a federal crime. Ryan, he laughed. A short, dismissive bark. Don't use legal words you don't understand. It is not stealing if it is for family. It is not stealing if it is for Mom. We used some of that money for her meds. You know, you used it for inventory. I said, you just said that. Money is fungible, he said, waving a hand. Look, don't be a narc. We will pay it back. Just chill out. I looked at my brother. I saw him clearly for the first time. He wasn't just spoiled. He was broken. He didn't see people as people. He saw them as resources. I was just another resource to be mined. I am not chilling out. I said, I froze my credit. I filed a fraud alert, and my lawyer is drafting the police report. Ryan's face changed. The smirk vanished. His eyes went cold. You wouldn't. Try me. If you file a police report, Dad will have a heart attack. Ryan hissed. It will kill him, and it will be your fault. No, I said. I am done owning your faults. I turned and walked away. You will regret this, Ryan shouted across the coffee shop. You are destroying this family. I walked out into the cool autumn air. I felt lighter. The grief was there, heavy and dark. But the confusion was gone. I knew who they were now. I spent the evening changing every password I owned. Email, bank, retirement, social media. I set up 2-factor authentication. I opened a new bank account at a completely different bank and rerouted my direct deposit. I was building a wall, a high, thick wall. The next morning, the mail arrived. It was a plain white envelope from the Department of Social Services. I sat on my kitchen floor, the same place I had read the Harrow documents. I opened it. Non-identifying background summary. Case 93, CK 402. I read the caseworker's typed notes from 33 years ago. Subject is a female infant. Born redacted. Biological mother is deceased. My parents had said she was a teenager who couldn't handle it. They said she gave me up. She was dead. I kept reading. Placement arranged via private legal agreement, the biological father's family, represented by legal counsel, has declined custody but has established a financial support structure to ensure the infant is placed in a stable, two-parent home. The selected kinship family. The Reeds has a pre-existing connection to the biological father's estate management. I stopped. Pre-existing connection to the biological father's estate management. My father, Mark Reed, wasn't just a random man who wanted a daughter. He was an employee, or a contractor, or someone who worked for my real family. The Reeds have agreed to the terms of the stipend, which includes a monthly maintenance allowance and a housing subsidy, contingent on the child's continued residence and welfare. Note from caseworker. The adoptive mother, Diane Reed, expressed hesitation regarding the emotional bonding but agreed to the placement based on the financial terms. I put the paper down. Diane didn't want me. She hesitated. She only took me because of the money. Based on the financial terms, the grief that hit me then was a physical blow. It doubled me over. I curled into a ball on the kitchen floor and sobbed. I cried for the baby who was sold. I cried for the little girl who tried so hard to be good, hoping that if she was just perfect enough, her mother would look at her the way she looked at Ryan. She never looked at me that way because I wasn't a daughter. I was a job. I was a paycheck. I lay there for an hour until the tears stopped. When I sat up, my eyes were dry and hot. I stood up. I washed my face. I put on my coat. I was going back to the house, not to argue, not to negotiate, to end it. I drove the familiar route. The hydrangeas were turning brown in the cold. I walked in without knocking. Mark and Diane were in the living room. It was quiet. They looked up when I entered. Mark started to stand up, his face reddening. "If you are here to apologize," he started. "Sit down," I said. My voice was different. It wasn't the voice of a daughter. It was the voice of a stranger. Mark sat. "I know," I said. I threw the copy of the social services summary onto the coffee table. "I know about the placement. I know about the stipend. I know that my mother died and you were hired to raise me." Diane made a sound like a wounded animal. She covered her mouth with her hand. Mark stared at the paper. He didn't touch it. "I know you spent the money on the house." I said, "I know you spent it on Ryan's school. I know you spent it on yourselves. It was for the household." Mark snarled. He didn't deny it. He just defended the accounting. We had to live. We had to maintain a standard. "You used me." I said, "You looked at a baby and saw a bank account." "We gave you a home," Diane cried. Her voice was muffled by her hand. "We gave you a family. You had birthdays. You had Christmas. I had a contract," I shouted back. The first time I had raised my voice, "You fulfilled a contract, and we loved you," Diane insisted, tears streaming down her face. "In our own way? In your own way?" I laughed. It was a jagged, broken sound. "You told me I wasn't real. You told me I was a charity project. That isn't love, Diane. That is resentment. You resented that you had to raise another man's child to pay your bills." Mark stood up. He was shaking, but not from fear this time. From rage. "You have no idea what it was like," he said, "watching that money come in every month, knowing it wasn't ours, knowing we were just the caretakers. And you walked around like you owned the place. I was a child. Mark. And you cost us everything," he screamed. The room went silent. "I cost you everything," I asked quietly. "Our pride," he shouted. "Our freedom. We were stuck here, watching you, reporting to some faceless lawyer every year, begging for approvals. We were servants in our own lives because of you." I looked at him. I saw the deep, rotting core of his narcissism. He didn't see the millions of dollars of support. He only saw the strings attached. I nodded slowly. "Okay," I said. I turned to leave. "Where are you going?" Diane whispered. "Away," I said. "You don't have to be servants anymore. I am releasing you." I walked to the door. "Kennedy," Mark yelled. "You can't just leave the bills." The loan. I opened the door. "Figure it out," I said. I walked out to my car. As I reached for the door handle, I heard the front door open behind me. I didn't turn around. I heard Ryan's voice. He must have been in the hallway, listening. Let her go. Dad, Ryan said. His voice was loud enough for me to hear. We can still fix this. I paused, my hand on the handle. We just need to get her to sign, Ryan said. We can forge it better this time. I know a guy who can notarize it backdated. We just need to get the papers. I got into my car. I locked the door. I looked at the house one last time. It looked like a normal American home. It looked safe. It was a lie. I started the engine and drove away. I didn't look back in the rearview mirror. I kept my eyes on the road ahead, where the credit bureaus were frozen and the locks were changed, and the truth was finally, brutally, mine. The conference room at Celeste Harper's firm was becoming my second home. The view of the Raleigh skyline never changed, but the stack of papers on the mahogany table grew higher with every visit. Celeste walked in, holding a fresh file folder. She didn't smile. She looked like a surgeon entering the operating theater. We got a partial disclosure. She said, sitting down. Harrow and Associates is trying to protect the privacy of the estate, but because we threatened a fraud investigation regarding the credit card, they released the trust summary. I leaned forward. Who is it? Who paid for my life? The grantor is deceased, Celeste said. She slid a document across the table. He died shortly after your birth. The trust was established in his will. The language is specific. Kennedy. It says the funds were for the maintenance, welfare, and protection of the beneficiary. She pointed to a paragraph in the middle of the page. Condition of support. The funds are to ensure the child is raised in a stable, two-parent environment, free from financial distress that might compromise her development. Free from financial distress, I repeated. Celeste nodded. But here's the kicker. The trust was set up with a base stipend, a generous one, but it had a clause for extraordinary circumstances. If the guardians faced unexpected hardship, they could petition the fiduciary for emergency releases. I looked at the spreadsheet Celeste had compiled. Look at the timeline, Celeste said, tapping the paper with her pen. I followed her finger. 1998. Emergency request guardian unemployment. Disbursement, $15,000. That was the year Mark bought the boat, I said quietly. He told us he got a severance package. He didn't lose his job. He quit because he didn't like his boss. Celeste kept moving down the list. 2002. Emergency request medical hardship. Disbursement, $8,000. That was the year we went to Disney World. I said, we stayed at the most expensive resort. Dad said he won a contest at the Rotary Club. 2008. Emergency request market downturn, stabilization. Disbursement, $25,000. Ryan's first car, I whispered. A brand new Mustang. Dad said he got a deal on it. Celeste sat back, crossing her arms. It is a pattern. Kennedy, every time your father wanted something, a renovation, a vacation, a car for your brother, he filed a hardship claim with the trust. He used you as a hostage. He told the fiduciary, we are drowning, and the child will suffer if you don't help us. So they paid, and he spent the money on luxuries. I felt a cold, hard knot form in my stomach. It wasn't just that they used the money, it was that they had to paint themselves as failures to get it. They had to pretend to be on the brink of collapse to squeeze more cash out of my name. And the fiduciary, I asked, did they check? They relied on the guardian's sworn statements. Celeste said, Mark signed affidavits, legal documents stating under penalty of perjury that the funds were necessary for household survival. So it is fraud. I said, it is absolutely fraud. Celeste said, and now that we have the credit card identity theft on top of it, we have enough to blow the doors off. She looked at me, her expression serious. I am filing a petition for a full forensic accounting review tomorrow, she said. We are going to demand they produce receipts for every single hardship disbursement, and when they can't because the money went to Ryan's tuition and Mark's toys, they are going to be liable for repayment. Repayment, I asked. They don't have any money. Then we go after the assets, Celeste said. The house, the cars. Ryan's startup capital if he transferred it from the joint accounts. Kennedy, this is the nuclear option. Are you ready? I thought about Mark screaming at me in the kitchen. You cost us everything. I thought about Diane hiding the bills behind the cookbook. Do it, I said. 2 days later, I was at my apartment, packing a bag for a work trip I didn't actually have, just to get away from the city. When there was a heavy knock at my door, I froze. My new address was unlisted. I looked through the peephole. It wasn't Mark. It was a stranger. A man in a cheap windbreaker holding a large envelope. I opened the door a crack. Yes, Kennedy Reed. Yes, you have been served. He thrust the envelope at me and walked away before I could speak. I closed the door and locked it. My hands were trembling. I tore open the envelope. It was a legal summons. Mark and Diane Reed versus Kennedy Reed. Civil complaint for unjust enrichment and reimbursement of care. I stared at the words. I couldn't comprehend them. I read the summary. Plaintiffs allege that defendant Kennedy Reed accepted housing, food, clothing, and incidental support beyond the age of majority without contribution. Plaintiffs seek reimbursement for room and board totaling $150,000, plus emotional distress damages. I laughed. It was a hysterical, jagged sound that scraped my throat. They were suing me for raising me. It was an intimidation tactic. Even I knew that. It was a desperate, flailing attempt to scare me into dropping the accounting review. They were trying to say, if you come after our money, we will charge you for the cereal you ate in 1999. I flipped through the pages. It was garbage legal work, probably drafted by some strip mall lawyer Ryan found. But then, a small piece of paper fluttered out from between the legal sheets. It wasn't typed. It was handwritten on stationery. I recognized pale blue paper with a floral border. Diane's stationery. I picked it up. Kennedy, please don't destroy us. We did what we had to do. You don't understand the pressure we were under. If you drop the review, your father will drop this lawsuit. We can just go back to how it was. Please, I am so afraid. Mom, I read the note 3 times. We did what we had to do. My emotional center, which had been hardening into concrete for weeks, suddenly wobbled. I felt a surge of that old, pathetic child longing. The part of me that wanted to save her. The part of me that saw her fragile and gasping for breath and wanted to pay the bill just to make the fear go away. She was scared. They were cornered animals. Maybe I was going too far. Maybe I should just walk away. Leave them to their misery. Why did I need to humiliate them? I sat on the floor. Holding the note, I felt heavy. I felt like the villain in their story. My phone pinged. It was an email notification. Department of Social Services. Secure file access. The updated summary. I wiped my eyes. I didn't want to look. I wanted to burn it all and move to another state. But Celeste's voice was in my head. Be an archaeologist. I opened the laptop. I logged into the secure portal. The file had been updated with the additional contextual notes I had requested. I scrolled past the standard data I had already seen. I got to the bottom section. Caseworker Addendum, November 20th, 1993. Placement rationale. The placement with the Reed family is classified as sensitive kinship, while Mrs. Diane Reed is not a blood relative. She was previously employed by the biological father's family estate in the capacity of household staff governess/assistant. She has a pre-existing knowledge of the biological family's circumstances. I stopped breathing. Household staff. Diane wasn't a random savior. She was the help. I read on. The biological family is prominent in the Charlotte area. The pregnancy was concealed to avoid scandal. The biological father's estate has agreed to the generous stipend on the condition of absolute discretion. The Reeds have been selected because Mrs. Reed is trusted to maintain the confidentiality of the child's parentage. The placement is, in effect, a paid arrangement to protect the biological family's reputation. I sat back, the room spinning. It wasn't just a stipend, it was hush money. Diane and Mark weren't martyrs who took in a stray. They were employees who took a job. They were paid to hide me. And suddenly, everything made sense. The resentment, the not our real daughter comments, the constant need to lower me, to remind me I was lucky, to make me feel small. They were the servants, and I was the secret boss. If I ever realized that the money coming into the house was my money, paid because of my bloodline, the power dynamic would flip. They couldn't have that. Mark's fragile ego couldn't handle the fact that he was living off the support checks of a child who outranked him socially and financially. So they broke me. They spent my childhood telling me I was worthless, so I wouldn't notice I was the one paying for the granite countertops. They elevated Ryan, their real legacy, to prove that they were the important ones, that their blood mattered more than my money. The wobble in my chest vanished. The pity for Diane evaporated, replaced by a cold, diamond-hard clarity. She hadn't written that note because she loved me. She wrote it because she knew that if I pulled the thread, the whole tapestry of their lies would unravel. She wasn't afraid of poverty. She was afraid of the truth that for 30 years, she had been serving the very child she treated like a burden. I stood up. I checked the time. It was 3 p.m. I knew where Diane was. Mark had moved her to a rehabilitation facility in Durham 2 days ago, the cheaper one. Because Elite Care had fired them, I drove there. The facility was a low brick building that smelled of industrial cleaner and boiled vegetables. It was depressing, but it wasn't a dungeon. It was just mediocre. I walked past the front desk. I didn't ask for permission. I knew the room number because I was still the emergency contact on her medical file. A detail Mark had been too lazy to change. Room 304. I walked in. Diane was sitting in a wheelchair by the window, staring out at the parking lot. She looked small. The oxygen tube was still taped to her face. She turned when I entered. Her eyes widened. "Kennedy," she whispered, Did you get my note?" I closed the door behind me. I didn't yell. I didn't throw things. I pulled the plastic visitor chair over and sat directly in front of her. Knee to knee. I got the note. "Mom," I said. She let out a shaky breath. "Oh, thank God. I told Mark it was too harsh. I told him suing you was a mistake. We can fix this. Kennedy, just tell your lawyer to stop. We can be a family again." I looked at her. I really looked at her. I saw the lines of worry, the fear in her eyes. But I also saw the calculation. I got the social services update. "Diane," I said. Her face went slack. The color drained out of her cheeks so fast she looked like a corpse. "I know who you were," I continued, my voice steady and soft. "You weren't a foster mom. You were the governess. You worked for them." Diane's mouth opened and closed. No sound came out. "I know the arrangement," I said. "They paid you to hide me. They paid you to keep the secret." Diane started to shake. "Kennedy, please." Why, I asked. It was the only question that mattered. "Why did you treat me like that?" I asked. "If you needed me, if I was the golden goose that paid for the house and the cars and Ryan's private school, why did you spend 30 years telling me I wasn't good enough? Why did you call me not real?" Diane looked down at her hands. Her fingers were twisting the hem of her blanket. "Because you weren't," she whispered. I waited. She looked up. And for the first time, I saw the naked truth in her eyes. It was ugly. It was pure envy. "You had everything," she said. Her voice was gaining a terrible strength. "Even as a baby. You had a trust fund. You had lawyers watching over you. You had a pedigree we could only dream of. Mark hated it. He hated that I had money I asked. He hated that he needed it." She spat. "He hated that every time we bought something nice, we knew it was because of you. We were the adults. We were supposed to be in charge. But the money was always yours, so you punished me for it." I said. "We had to manage you," she cried. "If you knew, if you grew up thinking you were special, you would have left us. You would have taken the money and walked away. We had to make you feel lucky to be here. We had to make you feel like you owed us." I stared at her. The logic was twisted, but it was complete. "You broke me on purpose," I said, "to keep me compliant. We gave you a home," she insisted. "Falling back on the old script, we protected you. You protected your paycheck." I said. The door banged open. Mark strode in. He looked frantic. He must have seen my car in the parking lot. "What are you doing?" he shouted. "Get away from her." He rushed over and stood between us, acting the protector. "You are poisoning her," he yelled at me. "Look at her. She is upset." "You are killing your mother." I stood up slowly. I was taller than Diane now. I was almost as tall as Mark. "I am not poisoning her." "Mark," I said, "we were just reminiscing about her old job." Mark froze. His eyes darted to Diane. She was weeping silently into her hands. "I know. Dad," I said. I used the word dad with as much irony as I could muster. "I know about the stipend. I know about the hardship bonuses you filed for every time you wanted a new toy. I know I was the bank." Mark's face turned a violent shade of purple. "You don't know anything," he snarled. "You think reading a few papers makes you an expert? You were a burden, a constant, nagging burden." I leaned in. "I was the only reason you didn't starve," I said. "And now, I am the reason you are going to be audited." I walked past him toward the door. I recorded everything. Mark shouted after me. "A bluff. A desperate, stupid bluff. I have proof you are harassing us." I turned at the door. I didn't record anything. I said, "I didn't need to. The numbers don't lie. And Celeste is very good with numbers." I walked out. I walked down the hallway, my heels clicking on the linoleum. I felt a strange sensation. It was the feeling of a heavy coat being lifted off my shoulders, the coat of guilt, the coat of "I am not enough." I left it there. In room 304, I reached the exit. The automatic doors slid open. Kennedy Ryan. He was jogging across the parking lot. He must have arrived right after Mark. I kept walking toward my car. "Kennedy, wait." He caught up to me at the driver's side door. He was out of breath. He looked handsome and panicked, a combination he probably thought was charming. "Look," he said, putting a hand on my car door to stop me from opening it. "Dad is losing his mind. Mom is a wreck. This has to stop. Move your hand." "Ryan," I said. He didn't move it. "Let's make a deal," he said. His voice dropped to that smooth sales pitch tone he used when he was trying to get me to pay for dinner. "What deal?" I asked. "We drop the lawsuit," he said. "Dad withdraws the reimbursement claim. You drop the accounting review. We walk away neutral." And I asked, and he paused, smiling as if he were offering me the crown jewels. "And we will finally treat you like family. No more jokes. No more, 'not real daughter.' We will include you. Real respect. I promise." I looked at him. I looked at the brother I had worshipped, the brother I had covered for, the brother whose private school tuition had been paid for by my hardship. He really thought that was what I wanted. He thought I was still so desperate for their scraps that I would trade justice for a seat at their table. "You still don't get it, do you?" I asked. "Get what I don't want to be in your family." "Ryan," his smile faltered. "I don't want your respect," I said. "It is worthless. Your respect is just a strategy to keep the checks clearing." "Kennedy, come on." I removed his hand from my car door. I did it gently, like removing a slug from a leaf. "The accounting review proceeds," I said. "Tell Mark to find his receipts." I got into the car. Ryan stood there, his mouth open. For the first time in his life, he looked entirely ordinary. The golden boy glow was gone. He was just a man standing in a parking lot, watching his future drive away. I started the engine. I had one more thing to do. I had to find the name of the man who died and left me a fortune that my captors had spent on themselves. I drove toward the city, leaving the Reeds behind in the dust. They were small now in my rearview mirror, so small I could barely see them. The name on the document was Arthur Hale. I stared at it, the letters black and sharp against the cream-colored legal paper. Arthur Hale. I knew that name. Everyone in Raleigh knew that name. The Hale family name was on the downtown library. It was on a wing of the children's hospital where I worked. He was a titan of local industry, a man who had built a textile empire in the 70s and died quietly in the early 90s. He was my father. Or rather, he was the man who had ensured I existed. Celeste sat across from me, her hands folded on the desk. She let the silence stretch, giving me space to absorb the tectonic shift in my reality. Arthur Hale had an affair, Celeste explained. her voice professional but softened by a hint of sympathy. The mother was a woman named Elena, a paralegal at his firm. She died in childbirth. Arthur was already ill himself. He died 6 months after you were born. But before he passed, he set up the trust. She turned the page to show me a scanned copy of a handwritten letter. The ink faded to a sepia brown. To the trustees. The letter read, "This child is innocent of my mistakes. She is to be raised in a home of stability and comfort. She is to want for nothing essential. Do not let her suffer for the circumstances of her birth." I traced the shaky signature. "Arthur, he wanted me to be safe," I whispered. "He wanted you to be secure." Celeste corrected. The trust was capitalized with $2 million in 1993. I looked up sharply. $2 million? Celeste nodded grimly. It was invested conservatively, but it grew. The interest alone was substantial. The stipend your parents, your guardians received was $5,000 a month, adjusted for inflation, plus housing allowances, plus educational allocations. $5,000 a month. In the 90s, that was a fortune. That was a wealthy life. And yet, I remembered wearing hand-me-down coats. I remembered Mark complaining that we couldn't afford brand-name cereal. I remembered the constant, grinding pressure of gratitude they demanded from me for the bare minimum. Where did it go, I asked, though I already knew the answer. Celeste opened the second file. This was the forensic accounting report. It was thick, bound in plastic, a tombstone for my parents' integrity. "We have categorized the misuse," Celeste said. She flipped the pages. 1999. Disbursement, $40,000. Stated purpose, emergency structural repairs. Actual use, purchase of a 26-foot fishing boat. Registered to Mark Reed, 2005. Disbursement, $60,000. Stated purpose, beneficiary medical hardship. Actual use, investment in Reed Logistics, a failed trucking venture started by Mark Reed, 2009. Disbursement, $35,000. Stated purpose, educational support. Actual use, 4 years of tuition for Ryan Reed at St. Andrews Prep. I stared at the line item, Ryan Reed. My trust fund paid for his private school. The same school where he learned to sneer at people like me. The same school where he made the connections he was now trying to leverage for his startup. They stripped the copper out of the walls of my life to build a pedestal for him. I said, Celeste closed the file. It gets worse. Kennedy, the credit card they opened in your name. The payments they made on it were coming from the trust. They were using your money to pay off the debt they created in your name, washing the funds to hide the trail. I felt a cold rage settle over me. It was different from the anger I had felt before. This wasn't hot or tearful. It was absolute. What do we do? I asked. We have 2 options. Celeste said, we can go to the police. This is grand larceny, fraud, and identity theft. Mark and Ryan would likely face prison time. Diane would be implicated as a co-conspirator. I thought about Mark in an orange jumpsuit. I thought about Ryan, terrified and soft, in a cell. And the second option, I asked, we force a settlement. Celeste said, we present this report. We demand a full separation of assets. We claw back what is left, and there is still about $400,000 in the principal account, and we ensure they never touch a dime of it again. We leave them with nothing but their own names. I looked out the window at the Raleigh skyline. I saw the Hale Library in the distance. I don't want them in prison, I said slowly. That is too easy. They would play the victim. They would tell everyone I was the ungrateful daughter who sent her elderly parents to jail. I turned back to Celeste. I want them to be irrelevant. I said, I want them to be poor. I want them to know exactly what it feels like to have to beg for stability. Celeste smiled. A sharp, shark-like expression. Then let's call a meeting. But before the meeting could happen, Mark made his move. He must have sensed the walls closing in. Maybe the bank had called him about the frozen accounts. Or maybe he just panicked when I walked out of the rehab facility. 2 days after my discovery, I received a frantic call from the patient advocate at the rehab center in Durham, Ms. Reed. This is Linda. I am calling because your father is here. He's trying to discharge your mother. Discharge her, I asked, gripping the phone. She isn't ready. She can't walk to the bathroom unassisted. He says he is moving her, Linda said. He says this facility is too expensive and that you are refusing to pay for it. He has a transfer paperwork for a state-subsidized nursing home in rural Johnston County. Ms. Reed. That facility has a 1-star rating. It is not a good place. I felt the blood pound in my ears. He was using Diane as a pawn again. He was trying to punish me by hurting her. If you don't give me access to the money, I will put her in a hellhole. Do not let him take her, I commanded. He is the husband, Linda said. Legally, he has the right. Unless you have power of attorney or… I cut her off. I am the payer. I said, I am coming there now. Do not let her leave the building. Stall him. Call security if you have to. I drove to Durham doing 80 miles an hour when I ran into the lobby. I heard Mark's voice before I saw him. I am her husband. He was shouting at the receptionist. I decide where she goes. This place is a ripoff. He was standing by the desk, red-faced, holding a plastic bag of Diane's clothes. Diane was in a wheelchair next to him, looking terrified. Her head slumped forward. Mark, I yelled. He spun around. You, he pointed a shaking finger at me. You did this. You froze the accounts. My card was declined at the gas station. I walked up to him. Stepping into his personal space, put the bag down. Mark, I am taking her out of here. He spat. We are going somewhere we can afford. Since you decided to steal our money, it was never your money, I said. I looked at the receptionist. I am Kennedy Reed. I said, I am the one paying the bill. I am paying it directly from my personal account. Today, right now. My mother is not going anywhere. Mark grabbed the handles of the wheelchair. She is my wife. And if you move her to that facility in Johnston County, I said, lowering my voice so only he could hear, I will have Celeste file an elder abuse charge against you by 5 o'clock today. And with the financial fraud evidence I already have, you will be arrested before you get to the parking lot. Mark froze. His hands whitened on the rubber handles. He looked at me, and he saw that I wasn't bluffing. He saw the daughter he had bullied for 30 years vanish, replaced by a woman who held his fate in her hands. You wouldn't, he whispered. Try me, I said. He let go of the wheelchair. He stepped back, his face crumpling into a mask of self-pity. Fine, he said. You want her? You pay for her. I am done. He turned and walked out the automatic doors, leaving his sick wife sitting in the lobby with a bag of dirty laundry. I knelt beside Diane. She was crying softly. He left me. She whispered. I took her hand. It was cold and frail. I am here, Mom. I said, you are staying here. You are safe. But even as I said it, I knew the truth. She wasn't safe because she was loved. She was safe because I could afford her safety. And that was the only language this family had ever spoken. I set up a direct billing arrangement with the facility. I hired a private patient advocate to visit her 3 times a week, ensuring Mark couldn't bully her if he came back. I locked down her care with layers of legal protection. Then, I told Celeste to schedule the final meeting. It was a Friday morning. The sky was a hard, brilliant blue. Mark and Ryan arrived at Celeste's office together. They wore suits. Mark's was ill-fitting, a little too loose around the neck, a sign of his recent weight loss from stress. Ryan looked polished, but his eyes were darting around the room, assessing the threat level. Diane was not there. She was too weak to travel. I sat at the head of the table. Celeste sat to my right. Mark refused to look at me. He stared at the water pitcher in the center of the table. Let's begin, Celeste said. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. She slid a single document across the polished wood. It wasn't the full report. It was a summary of findings. We have completed the forensic accounting of the Hale Trust, Celeste said. Mark flinched at the name Hale. The findings are conclusive, Celeste continued. Over the course of 30 years, approximately $1.2 million was diverted from the trust for purposes that do not meet the definition of beneficiary support. Ryan spoke up. His voice was smooth, practiced. Now, Wait a minute, he said. Diverted is a strong word. My parents raised her. There are overhead costs to running a household. You can't itemize every gallon of milk. We aren't talking about milk. Ryan, I said. I looked at him. We are talking about your tuition, I said. We are talking about the $60,000 Dad put into your failed logistics company. We are talking about the down payment on your condo in Charlotte, which the ledger shows was paid out as a housing stabilization expense in 2012. Ryan's mouth snapped shut. I didn't know, he stammered. I thought Dad's investments were paying off. You didn't ask, I said, because you liked the money. You liked being the rich kid. You liked looking down on me. The charity project. While you spent my inheritance. Ryan looked at Mark. Dad. Is that true? Mark slammed his hand on the table. Stop it, he shouted. He looked at me with pure venom. This is a witch hunt, he yelled. We gave you a life. We took you in when nobody wanted you. He stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. You are ungrateful. Kennedy, you have always been ungrateful, and you know why, because you are defective. That is why your real parents didn't want you. That is why we had to be paid to take you, he pointed a shaking finger at my face. You are not our real daughter, he screamed. You never were. You were a job, and evidently, a job that didn't pay enough for the misery you have caused us. The room went silent. Celeste looked ready to intervene, her hand reaching for the phone to call security. But I didn't flinch. I didn't cry. I didn't feel that old, familiar stab of rejection. Instead, I felt a profound sense of closure. He had played his ace. He had fired his biggest gun, and the bullet had bounced off. I picked up the accounting report. I held it in my hand, feeling the weight of the paper. I stood up slowly. I slid the report across the table until it hit Mark's hand. Then you won't mind losing the money my life brought into yours, I said quietly. Mark looked at the report. He looked at me. What he whispered. I am petitioning the court to dissolve the kinship arrangement based on fraud. I said, the remaining trust assets are being moved to a new vehicle under my sole control, and we are filing a civil demand for the repayment of the $1.2 million you stole. Stole, Mark sputtered. We spent it on the family. You spent it on your family. I said, you just said I wasn't part of it. I turned to Ryan. And since you were the beneficiary of illicit funds, Ryan, we will be looking into your assets too. That condo, the startup capital. It is all fruit of the poisonous tree. Ryan's face went white. Kennedy. Wait, he said, his voice cracking. We can work this out. Family helps family, right? I looked at him. I saw the fear in his eyes. He wasn't worried about me. He was worried about his valuation. He was worried about losing his car. I am not your family. Ryan. I said, I am the bank, and the bank is closing. I turned back to Celeste. Give them the papers, I said. Celeste handed them a heavy stack of documents. This is a formal notice of separation, Celeste said. You are to have no contact with Ms. Reed. You are evicted from the financial structure of the trust effective immediately. The house? She paused. The house is legally an asset of the trust, she said, since you purchased it with trust funds and maintained it with trust funds. The title will be transferred to the trust. We are giving you 60 days to vacate. Vacate, Mark gasped. He collapsed back into his chair. You are kicking us out of our home. It is not your home, Mark, I said. It is my investment property, and I'm liquidating it. Mark put his head in his hands. He began to sob. It wasn't a cry of remorse. It was the cry of a man who had lost his power. Ryan looked at the papers, then at me. You can't do this, he said. It is cruel. Cruel, I asked. Cruel is telling a child she isn't real for 30 years. Cruel is making a 10-year-old feel guilty for eating food she paid for. This is just business. Ryan, just household stabilization. I walked to the door. Kennedy. Ryan called out, Please, we can fix this. I will make Dad apologize. We will treat you right. I opened the door. It is too late for that, I said. I walked out of the office. I took the elevator down to the lobby. I walked out into the sunlight. I had one last stop. I drove to the rehab facility. Diane was in her room, eating lunch from a plastic tray. She looked up when I walked in. "Did you do it?" she asked softly. "I did," I said. She nodded. She didn't look surprised. She looked resigned. "Mark called me," she said. "He was screaming. He said you are taking the house." "I am," I said. Diane put down her fork. "He deserves it," she whispered. "And I suppose I do too." I sat down in the chair. "I am paying for your care here." "Mom," I said, "for as long as you need it, I have set up a separate fund. Mark can't touch it. Ryan can't touch it. You will be safe." She looked at me, tears filling her eyes. Why, she asked, after everything we did? "Because I am not you," I said. She reached out and took my hand. "I did love you." "Kennedy," she said. Her voice was trembling. "In my own way, I loved you. But I was so afraid of him, and I was so ashamed that we needed you. It made me hate myself, and I took it out on you. I listened to her. I believed her. It was a tragic, broken, useless kind of love. It was love mixed with arsenic. I know." I said. I stood up. "I am going now." I said. "Will you come back?" she asked. I looked at the woman who had raised me. I looked at the face I had spent my whole life trying to please. "No," I said. I let go of her hand. "I am not going to ruin you. Mom, I am not going to put you in jail. But I can't be your daughter anymore. I can't be the mirror for your shame." I walked to the door. "The patient advocate has my number." I said. "If you need anything medical, she will handle it. Goodbye, Kennedy," Diane whispered. "Goodbye, Diane." I walked out of the room. I walked out of the building. I got into my car. I didn't go back to my apartment. I drove to the cemetery on the edge of town. I found the plot easily. It was a large gray stone obelisk. Arthur Hale, 1940 to 1993. There was no one else there, just the wind and the oak trees. I stood in front of the grave. "Hello," I said. I didn't know him. I would never know him. But he had tried. In his own flawed, distant way, he had tried to protect me. He had given me a shield, even if the people he hired to hold it had used it to bludgeon me instead. "Thank you for the shield," I whispered. I finally learned how to use it. I touched the cold stone. Then I turned around and walked back to my car. I had a lot to do. I had to meet with realtors. I had to sign the paperwork for the new trust. I had a life to build, a real one. This time, one that belonged to me. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Ryan. "Ken, please, just answer the phone. We are family." I looked at the message. I pressed block. Then I put the car in drive and pulled out onto the road. The sun was shining. The radio was playing a song I liked. I rolled down the windows and let the wind hit my face. I was 33 years old, and for the first time in my life, the bill was paid in full. Thank you so much for listening to Kennedy's story. It was a journey of uncovering the truth and finding the strength to walk away from a toxic definition of family. I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Do you think Kennedy was right to take the house and cut them off? Or was she too harsh on Diane? And please, let me know where you are tuning in from. I always love seeing how far these stories travel. If you enjoyed this story, please make sure to subscribe to Revenge Stories for more tales of justice, betrayal, and redemption. See you in the next one.